All right, good morning. We are live with the Lawyers for Peace and Justice program this morning. We are so happy to have every one of you here to talk. I'm Kyra Fonteneau, and I'm here with Lawrence King, a fellow lawyer here in Birmingham. And Lawrence, why don't you tell everybody about yourself?
Thank you very much, Kyra. I'm excited to work with you today. 3 years ago in 2017, Birmingham Lawyers for Peace did its first presentation. It was a time of great fractiousness in our society here in Birmingham, nationally, and in the world. And off camera today, we have David and Bernard Nomberg, who have been instrumental in bringing this program together, as well as the one in 2017. And all of us, I think, want a way that we can find peace, where we can find a way to coexist with one another, reduce the heat, reduce the fractiousness. I'm a father, I'm a husband. I want a better world for my children, for my wife. I'm a neighbor, I'm a church goer. I want a better world for my neighbors and my church family. And about 3 years ago, I was looking at some civil rights photographs from that era in our country. And I saw a picture from Birmingham it's an iconic photograph. Many of you may have seen it, of a police officer barely restraining a dog that was attacking a Black peaceful protester. And in the background were several white people looking on. And as I stared at it, I said, I don't want to be that guy standing in the background and doing nothing. I have a voice, let me speak. But I'm no authority. I know people. I can help bring people together that I can learn from, and hopefully many can learn from. And that's what gave birth to what we're doing today. I'm so excited to work with Kyra, and I am so grateful to all of the speakers who have agreed to share with us, to help teach me, to offer their experience and their knowledge so that I can learn from that. And we hope that this program and this presentation will be meaningful to everyone involved. Kyra, pick me up from there.
All right, so I'm Kyra Fonteneau, and I am a lawyer also here in Birmingham. And, we've been, just experiencing the last several months in Birmingham and around our world. And, it's impacted me as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, and as a lawyer. And I think I find that as we've been going through this, we feel so disconnected from each other. And we are finding ourselves in the polar opposites, and either I believe this or I believe that. And the two, people who believe opposite of me oftentimes don't feel as though they can approach and talk and resolve problems. And so I'm so excited about being here. I'm excited that we can talk about these issues and also about how we can come together. It's difficult oftentimes for us to step into the shoes of others. But I think with this group of folks that we're about to be talking to or listening to, really, I think a lot of this will be us receiving information. This is a group that can help us kind of recenter and revise our notions about how we will interact, how we'll solve problems together, and how we'll go forward as we continue on this journey that we're all on together. And I think, sometimes we feel like we're alone, especially in this pandemic, because we are locked in our homes most of the time and we are outside each other. But we do have a lot of opportunities to commune with each other. And so I'm so happy that we can do this together today. Now,
We've got some really great clergy to kick us off with here today, to center us from the standpoint of different faith perspectives, and just absolutely phenomenal people that have agreed to share their time with us. We're grateful for that. Kyra, who are we going to start with today?
Our first speaker today is Reverend John McDonald, and he is the pastor of the Sacred Heart Catholic Church in Anniston, Alabama, and he most recently served as the Carl J. Peter Chair of Homiletics at the Pontifical North American College in Rome. Prior to that, John was president of John Carroll Catholic High School right here in Birmingham, and so we're really excited to have Reverend John G. McDonald with us today.
Well, good morning. How's everybody?
Good morning.
Living the
Good morning.
dream, Father.
All right. Well, I'm going to start my timer to be mindful of all the rules there. But thank you very much for the invitation to speak a little bit today, particularly as regards the theme of peace, which is so important and so integral to who we are as human persons. I decided to come and sit in the dining room this morning because it's really around the table where we become most human and are most able to develop intimacy and human interactions, which lead us to dialogue and to peace. But today what I wanted to talk about was sort of the interior origin of peace, the interior life of the human person. And the way I wanted to lead into that concept was actually to go back to 1963, April the 11th, to the encyclical issued by His Holiness Pope John the 23rd at that time, just 2 months before he died, and just a few months after the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Pope at that time wrote a letter, and he addressed it to all men and women of goodwill in the world. And this was the first time that a papal encyclical was addressed to all men and women of goodwill rather than simply to the bishops and the Catholic faithful. And he titled that document, Peace on Earth. And that is a beautiful thing to read, this document. Pacem in Terris is the Latin title. But peace on earth is a beautiful way that the Holy Father spoke about how the human person responds in this world in which we encounter violence, degradation, people that do not respect the essential human dignity of the other. How do we respond? And this encyclical is something that is applicable to every human person. Again, not simply people of faith, but to anyone who has goodwill in their heart. And that's really where it starts, because of the many things that he says in his writings, the thing that struck me the most over many years, and the thing that has been a source of meditation for me in my ministries and my work and everything that I do, he says that there can never be peace in the world in a significant fashion unless it begins in the heart of the individual. So each one of us are called to be at peace with ourselves. Because what tends to happen is that the human person is often blind to the violence that they have in their own hearts. And the suffering that happens in the interior life of the soul sometimes manifests itself outwardly. We, as human persons, can attack the other, we degrade the other, but what we don't realize is that really this lack of peace is in our own hearts. There's often self-hatred and violence within the human person. And without addressing that, without freeing ourselves from that, we will reach out oftentimes and damage our neighbor first. The Beatitudes that we have, so there are 8 Beatitudes, and one of them, which to me is one of the most beautiful, is it says, "Blessed are the peacemakers." Well, peacemaker in English is a nice term, and we kind of know what that means. But in almost every other European language, it's translated as one who constructs peace. So there's a real sense in which you have to build something. And that building block has to be founded on knowing oneself. We can go back to the oracle at Delphi, pre-Christian, the Greek oracle at Delphi. Often the wisdom that people got when they would go there to ask for answers to the questions of life, the answer they would get would be, know yourself. You have to know yourself. And from that point, that wisdom hasn't changed until today. So many of us haven't spent the time or had the quiet or the silence to come to know ourselves well enough that we can begin to be people who can construct peace. We need that foundation. And every significant movement for peace in human history begins in this place. It doesn't begin in an external locus of control. It begins in the individual. And I remember I had a wonderful spiritual director in my time in seminary in Rome, a Jesuit priest. And, you know, you go to your spiritual director and you talk about the life of your soul. And he listens. He's kind of like a mirror, or she. Also, you know, your spiritual director is like a mirror to you. When you speak, they reflect back honestly what they're hearing. And one time I was in there, quite honestly, I was griping. You know, we all have a little gripey moments when we got to gripe a little bit. And I was griping about an institution. And he told me very clearly, he said, don't ever look to an institution to have a conscience. The conscience only resides in the human person. And the individual has to change his or her, form their conscience for the good, goodwill, to do good and avoid evil. And it's best when people who have formed their consciences individually and have formed them well come together. When those people find that they have something in common, they have a desire to do something good. And all those people with the individually formed beautiful conscience come together to do a wonderful work. And so I remember that wisdom so clearly, and it makes all the difference in the world. We can't help but understand that many of us harbor in our hearts wounds from the past. We harbor legitimate sense of woundedness often. But it can happen that the lack of peace in our own hearts, as I mentioned before, causes us to lash out. But in order for any movement for peace to take root, we have to work on that level of interior knowledge. And what does that look like? I think a lot of people hear that and they say, well, that sounds like a nice idea, but what does it actually look like? It actually looks like having quiet in your life a little bit. We all need to have at least 5 minutes a day in which we are able to honestly and in the silence, turning off the radio, the TV, the social media, whatever means we have around us that's constantly speaking to us. We need to have some level of silence to sit and think about why we're motivated to do or to say the things that we have done or said. And then in those honest moments, we really encounter ourselves, and also for a person of faith, it's an encounter with God. And in this way, we come to know ourselves. And each moment like that, each moment of interior reflection is like a little brick. Every time you have that moment, you learn a little something more about yourself, a little more about God, and those bricks get stacked on top of one another until the next thing we know, we have built a wonderful edifice from the top of which we have a greater vision, because we begin standing on the ground. And if we build a tower, it's not to defend ourselves, but it's to have a better point of view so that we can look out and see things as they truly are. So, but again, I come back to the point of sitting here at the table and being in the dining room. As Catholic people, we consider ourselves the people of the table. And because the table and the altar are the center of our worship, our tradition. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the table is a place where we establish a level of intimacy with one another. I always think it's interesting, like in Italy, if there's a boy that likes a little girl and he wants to ask her out, you know, and maybe they're going to walk home from school together, or something, he's interested and maybe she's a little interested. He will ask her to walk with him, and then maybe he gets excited because she responds to him, and he goes maybe just a little too far. Maybe tomorrow we can go to the beach. But she might say to him in that moment, well, you know what? Going to the beach might be a good idea. Nice project, but we haven't even eaten together. And she's sending him the very clear message that a meal establishes a level of intimacy. Being able to sit at the same table and share what gives us life, which is food, no matter what it is, establishes an intimacy between people. And those small intimate groups are where we begin the work of peace. Every human person has to realize that you have to be able to sit down at the table and share the common good of human life with others, even if it's just a bite of bread, even if it's just a drink of water, something very simple, to share the basic goods of human life with one another, and to realize that there is nothing in the world that should prevent you from being able to do that. We call that communion. We call that koinonia, the being together around the table. And again, for us, it's a principle of faith, but also it's something that is accessible to every human person to understand the intimacy that we share as humans and the common good that we should be working for. And that's really what John the 23rd speaks about in his encyclical Peace on Earth, and how we can share with one another to always work for this common good. So I hope that's helpful. I got about another minute left, but I don't want to run right up to the edge and run over. But that's the idea that I wanted to share with you all today, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So.
Father John, thank you so much for that. Two things that you said that have really resonated with me. Spend time quietly every day, introspectively, looking at why do I think, why do I feel, what motivates me the way I'm acting. And second, find the opportunity to break bread with people that are not like me. Meet my neighbor, spend time with my neighbor. Thank you so much for reminding us of the importance of that.
Well, you're most welcome, and thank you for this opportunity. And I look forward to hearing the other presenters too. And I thank you for your efforts too for this work of peace. It's really noble and wonderful that we have so many people dedicated to this great end. So, whoops. So thanks again very much. God bless.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So Larry, when he spoke about breaking bread, and we are so separated right now, what are some of the ways that you are reenacting that ability to break bread, to make connection, even though we are so disconnected?
Well, I've got one example that comes immediately to mind. Several years ago, it dawned on me that I don't know people of the Muslim faith very well. I just don't know that many of them. And Birmingham is not exactly overpopulated with a high percentage of Muslim people, but that notwithstanding, I wanted to get to know Muslim people, to understand them. I actually read the Quran, and I asked one of my lawyers here that I knew was close friends with Kala Hadid, who then was the president of the Alabama chapter of the Council on American Islamic Relations. I said, will you set me up a lunch with her? And we did. And I began that lunch. My first meeting with her, I asked her, I said, will you judge my faith by the conduct of the Ku Klux Klan? And her eyes got big and said, no, of course not. And I said, then I will not judge yours by the conduct of ISIS. Let's put the extremes aside and get to know each other. And it has been just an absolutely wonderful friendship that I've had the privilege of enjoying ever since that meeting. It works. Father John is right. Break bread with those that you don't know well, and it will lead to a more peaceful coexistence.
Have you been able to maintain relationships, or how have you, through the distance that we've both been discussing, have you been able to maintain that relationship?
We have. Okay. And she's now moved, as you may know, to Arizona, and we have stayed in touch. It's worked. We're very good friends to this day, and I know she would say the same. Very excited now that we have another clergy leader from Birmingham to share with us. We have Rabbi Adam Wright is going to share with us. Rabbi Wright is the spiritual leader of Temple Emanu-El here in Birmingham. He is a cum laude graduate of Wheaton College in Religion and Judaic Studies. And his further formal education includes master's degrees in religion from Vanderbilt and 2 more, I think, from Hebrew Union College. His career leadership has included several years in California, where he served on the advisory board for Stand With Us San Diego, which is committed to developing community support and interfaith relations. His wife, Rachel, is a pediatrician at the University of Alabama in Birmingham, and they live with their daughter here in Birmingham. We're very grateful, Rabbi, to have you come share with us. It's you're following a Catholic priest and preceding 2 Protestants. I'm sure there's a joke in there somewhere, but thank you so much for agreeing to share with us.
And here we are with lawyers, so let's just all right.
What could possibly go wrong?
Set that one up. I don't have to, but thank you so much for having me. Since it's a political season, let's talk about polling. And in Judaism, we do have polling that indicated that American Jews identified Passover as their favorite Jewish holiday. And the reason why we love Passover, perhaps it's the food, but it's the idea of table fellowship. And our rabbis, and when I talk about our rabbis, I'm talking about the great rabbis from 1800 years ago, they marveled at the idea of the Greek practice of symposium, which is a Greek word to drink together. And this was an element of the banquet experience after the meal. Greeks would offer libations, they reclined, converse about politics, life, and philosophy. And therefore, the rabbis loved this idea, and therefore were able to come up with the Passover Seder. Because why? It's a conversation about celebrating intellectual diversity, that we should welcome questions, perspectives, and other interpretations for the sake of learning something new and for the appreciation of our differences. And when we even disagree with a colleague or family member with different worldviews and opinions, it's so important to maintain our friendships. Why? We are all unique and we are all special. We have our own opinions, worldviews, insight, and perspective. But sometimes we need to have a conversation, especially in Judaism, that celebrates individuality and this form of uniqueness. That Judaism, especially, we celebrate questioning, that we celebrate the differences of opinions, and that each opinion idea, it's multifaceted. In the Hebrew is rab panim, which means many faces, many interpretations. I think because we all know, and unfortunately, we've forgotten this important teaching, not just from Judaism, from our favorite holiday, but of course the ideals of this country. And instead of celebrating what I like to call modern liberalism, the idea to think freely without fear of coercion, we're embracing a binary, an either or, a world without interpretation, reflection, or introspection. And this is a world we are not only quick to judge, where we see this on social media, but we are quick to reject the other, to ridicule ideas, to disregard any different opinion, and even to end lasting and loving relationships because we have different political beliefs. And as I was invited, and thank you so much, I don't want to use this sacred space to talk about matters of politics, policy, and even politicians. I'm not here to talk about elected officials, their social media accounts, whether they participate in marches, or even their voting record. I think I was asked here because we have seen politics, or whom we voted in elections, is now becoming a binary wedge that is not just dividing Congress, but really where it really matters the most, our friends and our families. And I'm sure we can all know people in our lives where politics has utterly perhaps destroyed a relationship. And I hear from my congregants often about how people won't talk to them or engage with them because they think they represent the other. Politics, like life, it's complicated. It's not binary, it's multifaceted. And we can't understand politics through a binary code using only zeros and ones and nothing else to represent. And what do I mean by this? And I may be provocative, but that's the job of a clergy person. But I think it's really complicated. And I'm from Michigan, and I hold this idea of the blue collar mentality, but that anxious factory worker who is down on his luck in a Rust Belt state, who voted for a certain candidate does not make him automatically deplorable or a bigot. That college student who proudly marches on the streets demanding her idea for societal justice and change does not make her a socialist, and she does not want to redistribute our wealth. If you supported a tax bill, it doesn't mean we hate or neglect the poor. If we supported the Affordable Health Care Act under President Obama, it doesn't mean that we believe in socialized medicine. Securing the borders doesn't mean that we are against immigration, and supporting the Dreamers doesn't automatically believe that we believe in a pathway to open borders. It's not binary, it's not a 0, it's not a 1, it's complicated and it's multifaceted. And there's so many reasons that we develop our own unique political ideologies, but I think we have forgotten about this. And ironically and sadly, for many Jews that I know, they can't even celebrate their favorite holiday together, Passover, a holiday dedicated to family, to community, to intellectual diversity, and to conversation. Because if we voted for the wrong candidates, the joke is we can't break bread, but we can't break matzah. And this is happening more and more. We interrupt, we stop listening, we label, we mock, we yell, we criticize how people get their source for how they get our news. Families are torn apart, triangulation, and the list goes on. And if you just do a simple scan of the news by Googling this, therapists are reporting high number of clients seeking mental health professionals in order to deal with political polarizations within their relationships. And from 2016, we've indicated that 40% of Americans have said that has closed a harmful relationship. And 20% have indicated that they no longer talk to a family member because of politics. And there's a Jewish pollster, you may see him on television, named Frank Luntz. He's always pretty hip and he wears sneakers. And he wrote a political dialogue about how so many Americans are stopped talking to each other. And more studies indicate that relationships are being torn apart because of politics. And yes, couples are filing for divorce. And there's something called the National Institute for Civil Discourse, and they are receiving requests from churches and synagogues, Fortune 500 companies, where productivity is down because of this political tension. This is coming, more and more, and we can all see it. And I remember when I was a freshman in college, which seems ages ago, in Wheaton, Massachusetts, which is in Norton, it's a town with roughly 19,000 people. And the assignment was we had to go to a New England town meeting. And if you can't sleep at night, I recommend reading Tocqueville's Democracy in America, where he loved the idea of a New England town meeting, though he never went to one. But when we went to this town, people piled in that night to the school's gym to yell at each other whether or not to put a new traffic light in and other ancillary matters. But when the dust settled, the town did not pass any resolution. People left the gym conversing about life and, of course, their beloved Boston Red Sox. A new traffic light might not keep us up at night, but for the citizens of Norton, they were passionate about their issues just like we are. But we can't mentally exit the gym and talk about our two favorite college teams in Alabama. And sometimes we take our politics home and we jeopardize relationship. And I love when we get to make a pivot, when we get to say, even though we disagree, it's sometimes great to look at history. And we all know that President Ronald Reagan and the Speaker of the House, Tip O'Neill, they disagreed on everything, but were friendship and cordial for one another. And one of the greatest relationships I think that we have ever seen in the American political system is with the late Justice of Blessed Memory, Antonin Scalia, and Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, two opposite people on the political spectrum, but they were incredible, great friends who loved going to the opera and traveling the world together. And you can Google, there's a great picture of them sitting on an elephant in India. But then we can get deeper. If these nice ancillary stories can give us courage, as a Jew and as a proud staunch supporter for the state of Israel, I'm often reminded about Dr. Ahmed who serves at Hadassah's hospital, and he's the head of surgery. He's an Arab Israeli. He was born in a village in Nazareth. And just like Dr. Eid, and just like any Israeli, he has many political opinions. He probably doesn't favor the Likud government, but however, his mission as a physician and as an Israeli is more important than his political differences. And he is the leading authority in trauma surgery who will remove any organ transplant or bullets or shrapnel, regardless if one is a Jew, Arab, Muslim, or Christian. And this is what truly matters to him, not the political theater. But since 2016 and 2020, I think we've been in our own realm. We've been convinced that we've been right in our own perspective, especially politics. We've been convinced that our politics is more important than our relationships. We've been convinced that we are right and anyone who disagrees with us is wrong. We've rejected the other side, we stopped listening, but binary approach is not just harmful. For us, it's not Jewish, and it's not the ideals of this incredible country. And it's not how we engage the world. So therefore, when we are political and we gravitate toward any policies, politicians, cable news punditry, this is America, and people will do that. But still, we get to participate in the process. We vote, we march, we protest, we study issues, we decide. But as the election is near us, maybe we can remember the early ideals of the Passover Seder, that we can disagree on everything, but family and friendship matters the most. To
Rabbi,
keep daily conversations. Am I over my time? I am. So that is my mission for all of us today. I had a quote with John McCain, but we won't get there.
I wanted to thank you for that, reminding us to lay the election, lay the divisiveness of politics aside for a moment and remember that we must sit down with each other. We must talk to each other. We must coexist with each other. That's powerful in this season. Thank you for that.
Thank you so much for having me.
And it's so nice to talk to another Michigander. So.
What part?
Detroit.
Okay.
Of course.
Right. Then
that's right.
Thank you so much.
When you talk to people, you learn.
Absolutely. Thank you guys for the great work.
Thank you,
Rabbi.
Bye-bye.
All right, that was a great entree into our next speaker, who is Pastor George Whitlock, who's the bishop and senior pastor of the Vine Church of Birmingham. And he has been a speaker and he's worked in the ministry for years, the last 18 years of his life. And we, prior to being a pastor, he was he managed for a Fortune 100 top 10 company. And he coaches on the Maxwell speaking principles, and he holds a master's in education and counseling from the University of Montevallo. We are so glad to have Pastor George Whitlock with us. Or do we? Is Pastor Whitlock with us?
Well, it looks like he's here. Pastor Whitlock, can you hear us?
Hey, I can hear you well. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you. Awesome.
Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I'll set my timer. Rabbi, very, very, very good sentiments, but I thought it was going to be me. So I'm just glad to know I wasn't the first one.
Well, we're going to get our hook, but it's fine.
Okay. Awesome. So you let me know when you like me to jump in.
You're ready to go.
Timer and kind of go a little bit from there. Again, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be sharing with you all today. I will tell you that so much is going on in our world today. And as leaders, we define problems and offer solutions. From churches to corporations, we are witnessing a leadership crisis in almost every institution imaginable. In times of leadership crisis, we need principle-centered leaderships. Such principle-centered leaderships develop a tender heart towards all people and their private decisions. I agree with Father John, and I agree with Rabbi Adam. Those are personal relationships that we cannot allow politics to implement and infiltrate our personal relationships. We must live out our decisions through varying public opinion. And one thing is for certain, a principle-centered leader stands for the poor as much as for the affluent. They don't take the bribe, yet they speak out against all forms, I would say, of racism and injustices. And as faith leaders, we are called to be a voice to the voiceless, the orphan, the widow. In fact, Proverbs encourages us to speak up for those who cannot speak for themselves, for the rights of all who are destitute. Speak up and judge fairly, defend the rights of the poor and the needy. And I want to tell you that this is needed very much in our criminal justice system more than ever, especially in egregious and aggressive prosecutions. And many lawyers for peace litigate systematic and institutional injustices, such people as civil rights attorneys. And it takes a personally affected, passionate, and selfless person to stand up and to speak out for the rights of the marginalized and the mass criminalized. I'm thankful for all of those that currently work on the front lines to fight injustices in all forms of racism. And I want to say a scripture today. For the kingdom of God is, listen to these three things: righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. Now, righteousness, whenever we begin to talk about it, is the most essential element within the government of God. Jesus presented the righteousness of the heart, which comes from a circumcised heart that is transformed and renewed as a consequence of believing in him. And that's the key, a transformed heart. You know why? Because in fact, every way of a man is right in his own eyes. Many people, until we get to, like Father McDonald said, that literally we have to have personal reflection and quiet time. God does a work in our heart, and that transformed heart that is renewed as a consequence of trusting in him begins to give us the ability to do justice, to do judgment. Listen to this one: to do justice and judgment is more acceptable to the Lord than sacrifice. Did you hear that? Did you catch that? To do justice and to do judgment is more acceptable. So whenever we talk about kingdom righteousness, it is one that is birthed in the heart of a man that is in line with the heart of God. It is birthed in the heart of a man that's in line with the kingdom of God. The righteousness of God is to do the acts of social justice. Listen to this. I love the scripture. I'm a man of scripture and deep prayer. Give justice to the weak and the fatherless. Maintain the right of the afflicted and the destitute. Rescue the weak and the needy. Deliver them from the hand of the wicked. They have neither knowledge nor understanding. They walk about in darkness, and all the foundations of the earth are shaken. We can all agree that the world is in the midst of a global shaking, whether we talk about emotionally or financially or spiritually. So when we talk social justice, it reflects a fundamental valuing of fairness and equity in resources and rights and treatment for marginalized individuals and groups of people who do not share equal power in society because of whether that's their immigration status, their racial status, their ethnic, their age, their socioeconomic, their religious heritage, or physical ability. Remember, God's view of social justice is to do justice, and judgment is more acceptable than sacrifice. So we were not placed on this earth to follow a personal agenda or try to establish a personal sense of justice. We are here to carry out the will of God and to execute his righteousness. Men and women with the heart of God will cry out for justice on the behalf of the weak and vulnerable. To show and manifest the righteousness of God on the earth, we must govern and judge without prejudice. That's not going to happen in our own strength. That's not going to happen in our own way. But we must have a circumcised heart. We must have personal reflection, deep prayer, and we must be fair and we must be just. However, this type of behavior can only be carried out once again through a heart that has been transformed and changed by God. Someone who is full of God's love and whose character has shaped him. People of faith and goodwill, listen, are majority owners of the solution during this deep leadership crisis. Yes, people of faith and goodwill, whether Catholic or Jewish or Muslim or Christian or whatever religion or whatever race or whatever ethnicity or wherever you are from, people of faith and goodwill are majority owners of the solution to this leadership crisis. Now, let me talk a little bit as people of faith. We have a duality of response to injustice and civil unrest. We must pray and petition heaven while simultaneously peacefully protesting injustices and pursue policy reform for all of humanity. You see, God searches for men and women who love justice and hate iniquity, people who want to fight for the rights of the impoverished, the widow, the needy, and the foreigner. In Birmingham, we're talking about Birmingham Lawyers for Peace. W.C. Clemens, retired judge, comes to mind when I think about not all laws are just. He is a man that litigated, a man that fought, but a man that had personal, effective ministry through the legal justice system. He had the ability to take what he grew up in and what he was exposed to and turn it for good. And so people of prayer, we're not just people that have prayer for transformation of kings and rulers and institutions, but for justice and judgment. And we ask for deliberations and decisions through our legislative process and judicial branches of government. But we understand the institutions, as Father McDonald says, does not have and cannot create peace. It's the individual that is in the position. That's why I started with, we are in the midst of leadership crisis, from churches to corporations to government all over. We need hearts that have been changed. So civil rights litigators help us to fight firsthand through the court system. There must be justice and righteousness in our decision making. And we must be righteous towards our people, whether they're poor, whether they're needy, whether they're rich, whether they're affluent. And maybe we can take some lessons from Jehoshaphat, the leader, Jehoshaphat. Back in 2 Chronicles, we learned something. He appointed judges in the land and all fortified cities of Judah, city by city. He said to the judges, listen to the wisdom of Jehoshaphat. Consider what you are doing, for you do not judge for man, but for the Lord who is with you when you render judgment. Now then, let the fear of the Lord, for the Lord our God will have no part in unrighteousness or partiality or taking of a bribe. Now catch the context, because Jehoshaphat took over leadership from a nation, from his father, that was impartial and not fully committed to God. Jehoshaphat can be considered, if you will, your modern day law and order leader. He established and administered law and order. As a side note today, love is all of God's law and order. It is the kingdom of God. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son. So three things that a peacemaker, as we're talking about peace, three things that a peacemaker represents. A peacemaker is caring. A peacemaker is compassionate, and a peacemaker is righteous in their character. So what is righteousness? It's the meaning to live upright, to have correct, to make adjustments when we are wrong, to admit where we are incomplete in our understanding, to be sensitive, to walk with humility. Here it is. Righteousness is to live upright, correct, and morally blameless. Now, we're not blameless in on our own strength. We're not correct all the time. So humility, grace, and forgiveness, we've forgotten about these natural human characteristics of when we get into political debates and conversations, and who you vote for and who you like and who you dislike and who you approve and who you disapprove. But God gives us redemption in his dealings with us as humanity, not just punishment. So we're not to just judge and to throw away and cast away individuals, but we are to redeem and to restore. Jehoshaphat wisdom is very good for today. Consider what you are doing. That's one of the things I would say in this landscape of what we're dealing with. Consider what we are doing. For our judgment is of man, but we must judge knowing that the Lord is with us. And when we render judgment, let the fear of God lead us in how we come about judging. Be very careful, Jehoshaphat says, what you do, for the Lord our God will have no part in unrighteousness, partiality, and taking the bribe. I just have a few moments, and so let me allow some specific facts locally concerning leaders define problems and then they work towards sustainable solutions. So if we talk about the criminal justice system today, we're not talking about taking monetary bribes that might exist or kickbacks, but in exchange. We can talk about, as my community, impacted by the unjust laws sometimes that are designated to incarcerate massively Black bodies and brown bodies. And so, even depending upon where you are, you don't have the resources to fight. I'm reminded of something recent as that whole high profile altercation between the Toronto Raptors president and Alameda sheriff's deputy. And we are for all lives. And an unjust charge or arrest or subsequent conviction can be the beginning of the end for people without significant resources. Let me get ready to close, because Anthony Ray Hinton held for 28 years here on state death row. Jefferson County has a jail population that is designated. It is, listen to this, in 2015, Black people made up 44.1% of Jefferson County's population, but nearly 70% of the jail population. At the same time, we had our white counterparts at only 13%, but had more of almost 50%. So I'm simply saying that as people of faith, it is very complicated and multifaceted. So I want us to sympathize, not just a counterfeit form of compassion, but release compassion toward a community broken by unrighteousness and partiality, as well as being defined by heartache that is motivated by someone else's pain that prompts us to take action. So let us take action and let us move together as faith leaders. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for listening.
Pastor
And
Whitlock,
all the people said amen.
That was
Thank you.
amazing.
That really was. Pastor and Kyra, one of the things that I'm taking away here is that there are none so blind as those who choose not to see. And you're reminding me that I need to choose to see. Even when it's painful, I need to look.
Yes, can I make one last statement? And it was Ronald Reagan. I heard Rabbi Adam quote. Ronald Reagan, the 40th president of the United States of America, said this: peace is not absence of conflict. It is the ability to handle conflict by peaceful means.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Beautiful. Thank you. We have another fantastic speaker coming up now. He will explain to you just why he chooses sometimes to address himself as an SOB. He is the Reverend Dr. Bill Morgan, a United Methodist minister. He grew up in Birmingham. He went to city schools in Birmingham City College. He then went to seminary at Vanderbilt. He then came back to Birmingham, and through the years, he's been the senior pastor at a number of Alabama churches, including Tuscaloosa First United Methodist Church and Canterbury United Methodist Church in Birmingham, in Mountain Brook, actually. And along the way, also, it served as a district superintendent with supervisory responsibility over dozens of Methodist churches throughout the North Alabama Conference. He recently retired, but that didn't take. So he's jumped right back in as one of the pastors working actually at my home church, Asbury United Methodist Church. He describes himself as the husband of Diane Weekly Morgan of Birmingham, the parents of Bailey and Andrew, and the proud person of his 3 granddogs. I have, on a personal note, worked with Pastor Bill on projects in the inner city of Birmingham across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines. I'm blessed to call him one of my teachers. I'm blessed to call him one of my friends. I'm humbled to have the opportunity to introduce the Reverend Dr. Bill Morgan. We welcome you, Pastor Bill. Please share with us today.
Thank you, Larry. I'm glad to be here. One reason, because my good friend Larry King asked me to, and you are my favorite Larry King. One in Birmingham is a lot better in my estimation than the one in Hollywood or wherever. So thank you for your friendship. And I don't exactly mean to go political, but I know we have Senator Jones speaking today. And for whatever it's worth, for 12 years, I had the honor and the fun of being the pastor of the church where Doug and Louise Jones goes. And for whatever it's worth, you just need to know they're regular church people in the very best sense of the word. Regularly there, even sit up close, regularly in Sunday school, learning things about how to live life, regular in their giving, regular in their serving in mission trips and service projects around the community. They've hung out like in one of your places that you care about, the Church of the Reconciler, Larry. And so that means a lot to me, and I'm glad that we'll be hearing from him today. I have just been writing notes furiously from the first three speakers. I'm kind of thinking about, you remember the old thing where Lucy and Linus and Charlie Brown are looking at clouds, and one of them says, Lucy says, well, that looks like the profile of Leonardo da Vinci. And Linus said, well, doesn't that one over there look like the Sphinx in Egypt? And then they asked Charlie Brown what he sees. And he says, well, I was going to say a ducky and a horsey, but I think I'm going to change my mind. So I have thought about coming at this in a different way. I am whatever else I am. I'm an SOB. That is, I'm a son of Birmingham. Now, some may use those letters in another way, but I grew up in Birmingham. I have lived near or in Birmingham all my long life. And to think about peace in the context of the time that we live now, it's very much, I think, in the area of peace among groups of people in our society. There's world peace, and that's so important, and personal peace, which is a bridge to social and systemic peace, as the rabbi and the ministers have shared with us in each of their own ways. But before I talk a little bit about that, I want to take a bus ride real quick into the Bible and just simply say, if we had time, and I had enough intelligence and time, I could make the connection between the New Testament and the Hebrew Bible, the connections between peace and love and justice. To some degree, New Testament peace is more of that peace of the heart, that peace that gives one a kind of non-anxious capacity for self-awareness, for empathy for others, that helps us be the kind of people that people like to see coming instead of dread seeing coming. The peace and the love and the justice that gets some emphasis in the Hebrew Bible, and these are complementary. They're not in any kind of contest. I think is more connected. The shalom peace, the image in Micah doesn't use that word of shalom, is everyone under their own vine, their own fig tree, by extension, their own olive tree. That is, everyone having a place and a space and the resources they need to have enough in this world. So some don't have too much while others don't have enough. And so there's a kind of crisscross that I think is important between personal peace and what we would call social or societal or systemic peace, shalom, justice. And I grew up in the cauldron of the racial ferment of Birmingham. My family, my extended family, friends, church, people I went to school with, I mean, they represented the whole continuum of people who were starch segregationist. And there were some significant family members that were most influential with me that were moving toward inclusivism, embracing the power of people understanding each other for a basic equity and equality. The word in those days was integration. And so I remember looking back, you don't know it at the time, but in this wonderful lens of retrospect that God gives us, I think the day that I realized the intersection between personal peace and justice was when I jumped on the bus. Some of you are, well, none of you are old enough to remember when everybody rode the bus in Birmingham. I mean, people rode the bus to go to work. You rode downtown to go to the doctor. You went downtown to go to the movie, to buy your school clothes, to eat. And the great controversy in the mid 1950s and the early 60s. And so I think I was about a 7th or 8th grader. My buddy Johnny and I jumped on the bus, and this was in the early 1960s, and it was just filled with people going downtown to Birmingham. People didn't go to the shopping centers quite as much then as they have come to do now. And the bus was full, and I just glimpsed kind of midway, there was one seat. And so I ran to beat my buddy Johnny to the one seat. And so here I am, you know, about a 7th or 8th grade, and I sit down, and it's the first time in my life that I have sat by a black person. And out of the peripheral vision of my eye, I thought, that's a black person. Do I get up? Do I sit down? And then I looked more closely, and the black person was the person I knew, Miss Juanita. And, you know, for all through elementary school, every day when I went through the lunch line, Miss Juanita served my plate. And so as we sat there and talked, all that wasn't coming to my mind then, but I realized that day systemic justice and peace intersects with personal peace and relationships with people. It's systemic. Laws have to be made whether people want to hug and kiss or not. Someone has said that justice is a sort of rough cut love applied in society. There's just justice that has to happen whether you feel like it or not. But it was important in me growing up to realize that I, as a person in Birmingham, the transition in life to have a fuller understanding and appreciation for all people, to have a deeper appreciation for what people go through. And if I'm going to check my time here real quickly, later on in life, I've come to recognize the truth more and more, although I don't get it all, is this thing called white male preference. And Larry, you and I had a conversation. You said, you know, you might even add straight. If you're a white, straight male, particularly through the years, you just had access to things. You had an ease of getting jobs, being accepted in situations that you didn't even realize. And so aging white men like me are in kind of continual recovery to better understand what it means to have structural change in our society so that female women and people of color and different ethnicity and national heritage have some of the access, and thank goodness they do, by rights and great immense talent for our lives together. But I just have to say, as an aging white guy, SOB, son of Birmingham, every now and then it'll crop up in me and realize even people with the best intentions still have those little incubuses of bigotry. And I guess it gets pulled out in me sometimes in traffic when somebody real young or female or some kid pulls out in front of me and there goes that kid, there goes that woman, or there goes that person, and realize that there's a kind of a vigilance and compassion and equity and justice that aging white men, it's our challenge to continue to grow, because the transformed heart and the transformed life is a process. It's not a destination. And I appreciate being able to be here today and to be thankful for people like you who encourage each other and one another to work for this justice and love and peace. Back when I was a kid in youth group, we sang, you know, let there be peace on earth and let it begin with me. And it's still a good song. Thank you for this conversation.
Dr. Bill, thank you so much. And I'm just going there. I am an aging white guy. I need to look at myself more closely. Thank you so much for pushing me, pulling me, teaching me, nudging me, having me remember that I need to do that too. I need to introspect. Your reminder is on point. I'm grateful as always.
Thanks, friend.
So Larry, we talked about this a little while ago. I think we had a conversation about the space of listening and coming from a place of privilege. And I think you rightly indicated that you understood that you have a certain amount of privilege and the ability to kind of make decisions and judgments without fear for your children or without concern for some of the issues. And so you can see empathy, but possibly hearing what other people are experiencing is important. Can you talk and just expand a little bit about what you've been grappling with as you've seen events unfolding recently?
Yeah, I have a gay friend as one example that I go to church with, who one time shared that all of his life, when he's gone into a church for the first time, his first thought is, am I going to be condemned from the pulpit today? If the people know the truth about me, will they hate me? I see brown-skinned people, perhaps with Middle Eastern heritage, in Costco, told by other people in line, you need to go home. I see African-American people being pulled over by the police, and their worry is not, if I get a ticket, I'm going to get more points and my insurance is going to be more expensive. It is on their mind from the family experience that have been shared with them on interacting with the police. I hope I don't die here today. And I have to understand this to be a member of the society in which I live. God informs me that I need to look at you, Kyra, and recognize that you are created in God's image, and God loves me no more and no less than he loves you, or Bernard, or Father McDonald, or Rabbi Wright, or Pastor George Whitlock. And if I'm going to love my neighbor as my faith commands me to do, then I need to know my neighbor. I need to listen to my neighbor. I need to understand my neighbor so that I can connect on a foundational level. How can I love someone who I don't know? It's an active verb. And my faith does inform me that these are the things that I need to be working on as that aging white male of privilege and preference that Dr. Morgan described.
Well, we are about to make a turn, right? So we've gotten the word in many different forms for the last few minutes. And now we're going to talk to people who are advocates. We're going to talk to people who have been involved in the legal system in various ways. We've got a powerhouse group of folks who are with us to talk about how lawyers can also help in this peace and justice. We've got the spiritual piece, and we're going to get a little bit more of the spiritual piece, but we now need to kind of begin to think about how we actionalize this as lawyers and how we internalize this as lawyers. And so our first guest, I hope we have, is Sister Lynn McKenzie. And Sister Lynn McKenzie is a Benedictine sister of the Sacred Heart Monastery in Coleman. She serves as the Communio Internationalis Benedictarum for the Benedictine sisters, which is approximately 13,000 Benedictine nuns across 5 continents. But she's also a lawyer. And Sister Lynn McKenzie has also worked as an ombudsman for the Alabama Department of Labor settling or helping people settle workers' comp disputes. And she has practiced as a lawyer as a nun. And so she has a very interesting perspective about how we can marry both that spiritual and our calling as lawyers. So I'm so happy to have Sister Lynn McKenzie on with us, and so excited to hear what she has to share with us.
Thank you so much, Kyra, and to Larry too. It's really great to be here, and I'm grateful to be a part of this group of people who care enough to bring us all together, to seek authentic ways of being one people, but with diverse opinions and backgrounds. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I told Larry King that this invitation to participate in this gathering is yet another opportunity for me to re-examine my own prejudices and lack of openness. And who of us doesn't need to do this? I think your presence here today through this Facebook live stream shows your hope for our present and our future, and your willingness to look at yourself to see where you could improve the current atmosphere of where you live and work. So we've shifted now into the lawyers. And lawyers, as you know, are generally known for speaking very well, and less known for their listening. But as I learned from my earliest years as a lawyer, listening is every bit as important as talking, if not more important. Because how will we really know our case that we're supposed to be presenting unless we listen to our clients? How will we know the opposing side's case if we don't listen to opposing counsel and the opposing party? I learned way more in listening to my clients and their life stories than I did in pontificating about this or that point of law. Listening to those life stories of people helped me to be a better advocate for them. You know, our system of justice in the United States is an adversarial system, but we don't have to be adversaries to seek and find justice and peace. Actually, as all lawyers know, our American system of justice would break down altogether if it weren't for lawyers and their clients working together to resolve differences through informal or formal mediation. Because most often, it is in learning more about each other that we can resolve our differences. I've served as a mediator, as Kyra mentioned, and actually it's work that I love doing, and I'm always glad when someone invites me to serve in that way. I want to quote Abraham Lincoln in what he did in encouraging lawyers to work for peace. He's quoted as having said, "Discourage litigation. Persuade your neighbors to compromise wherever you can. As a peacemaker, as a peace builder, as Father John pointed out, the lawyer has superior opportunity for being a good person. There will still be business enough." That's what Abraham Lincoln said. So, as Kyra said, besides being a lawyer, I'm also a Benedictine sister, and I live at Sacred Heart Monastery in Cullman, Alabama, for the last almost 40 years. I know I probably don't look that old, but so I live with, you don't have to laugh, Larry. So I live with 30 other women, and you can imagine that 30 women do not always think alike. So we have to learn how to listen to one another and to express ourselves peaceably. And we help each other understand each other. And we pray together. That helps a lot. In recent years, as a Benedictine sister in the Catholic Church, I was called to leadership among Benedictines in North America and around the globe. And in that international work, I've learned that even though all of us Benedictine sisters, we all have that in common, that we are Benedictine sisters, that life is lived in many different cultures where there are many different languages spoken. You know, I only speak American English, or maybe Southern American English, though I've tried for years to learn to speak Spanish, and I'm working on it again during these months. And by the way, I've been using Zoom for meetings for about the last 6 years. So I was already up to speed when this pandemic began and ended my globetrotting. And so like most of you, I have been connecting with people online like we are today. I bring this up about meeting with Benedictine women around the world because I've learned that one has to listen closely and to speak very consciously, thoughtfully, carefully, in expressing oneself to others for whom English is not their first language. It's hard enough for those of us who grew up speaking English to understand one another, given our various families of origin and the different ways we think and speak. But it is more challenging to speak an international English without idiomatic expressions that are culture bound. And I have to say, sometimes I've learned the hard way what expressions are idiomatic and make no sense to someone else who is from a different culture and language. I want to say a bit about why I think my background as a Benedictine sister in the Catholic Church, what that has to bring to the table of peacemaking. As Benedictine sisters, we follow what is called the Rule of Saint Benedict, which is a document from the 6th century that has proven to be incredibly adaptive to different cultures and times. The very first word of Saint Benedict's guide to monastery living is listen. The very first word. He instructs that we should all listen to one another with the ear of our heart. If we're truly listening with our heart, it's much more difficult to jump to judgment. Think about that. Isn't our first and natural inclination when someone is saying something or acting in a way we don't agree with to judge that person negatively? It's just the natural thing. But if we listen with our heart, it's much less likely to happen, that judgment, that immediate judgment. Another very important attribute that Benedict teaches for good community living is humility. Actually, it's the longest of his teachings. And I would say, sadly, that humility seems to often be sorely lacking in our public discourse. Humility requires and calls forth deep listening, knowing that the truth is bigger than we are. How about that? It's bigger than we are, than I am, than you are. We don't have a corner on the truth. Now, it's true. Usually, truth is found in us, but it's not only in us, but also in others. And humility recognizes that. I heard a facilitator of a discussion say one time that we all have a piece of the wisdom. None of us has all of it. But it takes all of us putting in our piece of the wisdom and then listening for others' piece of the wisdom to make the picture whole. Oh, God. Psalm 34 in the Hebrew scriptures has the line, "Let peace be your quest and aim." And this is something that Saint Benedict in the 6th century echoed in his own teaching. It is the reason that the word pax, P-A-X, which is the Latin for peace, is found in every Benedictine monastery all over the world, no matter what culture, no matter what language they speak. And how do we live in peace? We listen. We don't suspect the worst in others. We look for the good. We act with respect, recognizing that each person and every person has dignity and is worthy of respect. So instead of popping off in anger and with sarcasm when someone says something that really makes no sense to us, how about this instead? How about if we say sincerely, help me understand. Help me understand what you mean. Help me understand why you say that, why you think that, why you feel the way you do. Restrain that immediate judgment and instead take the time to wonder and ask. Sure, we're always going to have disagreements. We will never understand everyone, but we can try more. We can be more genuine in our desire to seek common ground. It can be found. When our experience of dialogue is genuine, we will not remain the same. And that's a good thing, to be changed. It takes a lifetime to get this right. So let's be patient with ourselves and let's be patient with others. But always remembering that no one person has it all, least of all ourselves. If we won't forget that, we are much more likely to give the other person the benefit of the doubt and to be able to live in peace. To close my remarks, I want to share a poem or a portion of a poem by Denise Levertov, a 20th century poet. It is entitled A Shared Grain of Hope. She writes, please take this grain of hope so that mine won't shrink. Please share your fragment so that yours will grow. Only so, by division, will hope increase. So wrote Denise Levertov. So let's share our piece of truth and receive others' piece of truth, and it will grow into a whole. And let's share our hope with one another, as the poet Levertov suggests, and it will grow and make our world better. Thank you for having me.
Sister Lynn, I have to ask you a question, if I might. One of the things that you said was that instead of popping off in anger, try telling the other person, help me understand. And I'm wondering if that was directed specifically at me, since you knew that we'd be seeing each other today.
I often have to say to you, Larry, help me understand what is going on in that mind. But I know what's going on in your heart is always good. And it's so indicative of bringing people together today. So I thank you, Larry and Kyra, and to the Nombergs for doing this. It's so important that we be conscious of and be serious about bringing peace to our world. And it starts one person at a time.
Kyra, one of the things that Sister Lynn emphasized was listening with the ear of my heart. I'm not familiar with that saying. I'm wondering if that's a phrase or a directive that you've heard before, and what you take away from that.
You know, it's really interesting. I think, you know, we also oftentimes as lawyers, we listen to respond and we don't listen to have empathy, and we don't listen to affirm. And so, and that's a very difficult, because we're heading down our, you know, our checklist of things we got to cover, or the things that we want to hear to make our case better. And I think there's a tendency to do that in life as well. And so we don't finish, you know, we don't finish hearing before we respond. And so, and if you don't hear, you know, you can't really have empathy. You can't really, we can nod and we can say, you know, I hear you, But if you really aren't listening to gain understanding about people, and I think that's one of the things that we need to work on. I think I definitely need to work on that. But as a person who went to Catholic schools, a proud Catholic school, I think that Sister Rosita would have told me to do just what Sister Lynn has told me to do, is to listen and to hear.
Thank you.
Lynn, I have one other question. I've known you for many years, and I take for granted that you have your inner turmoils and your inner struggles, but you have projected peace and calm every time that I've ever had the pleasure of being around you. And you can say no to this, of course, but what are a couple of things that you use in your mind to kind of check off on a daily basis that permits you to greet each other or greet people warmly and project that peace on a daily basis? Where does that come from, and where can I get some?
You know, I was thinking today before joining you, I was feeling butterflies, and I said, God, help me forget myself and to only focus on you and on the other. And so if I can forget myself and whatever concerns are in me, and instead be open, I think that's what makes peace possible. Self-forgetfulness is pretty important.
The humility of being.
Yeah, and as I said, it's a lifetime to learn that. And I try to learn it every day if I can listen to others closely enough with the ear of my heart, and know that there's another way of thinking about things than just the way I have imagined things. Thank you.
That's
Thank you so much.
incredible.
Your words have been so powerful today, and we're so happy to have had you join us today. And I think Larry's going to talk to our next speaker, who we are all excited to hear.
We are. What an honor, what a privilege. As a bike riding child, he was beaten by white police officers for not making it home before the street lights came on. As a college student, he served as a student marshal on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial when the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King told the world about his dream. When the home of his across the street neighbor, civil rights lawyer Arthur Shores, was dynamited by the Klan, Judge Brown raced from his home toward the rubble to see who he could save, when a Birmingham police officer who had watched the entire act of terror threatened to shoot him with the shotgun perched in his lap. Judge Brown replied, never breaking stride, then you'll shoot me in the back. He was the first African-American to begin and complete his legal education at Birmingham's Cumberland School of Law. He was the first African-American selected as presiding circuit judge in Jefferson County, Alabama, right here in Birmingham. On a personal note, he takes my calls when I'm troubled. He is my brother in a shared faith. I laugh with him, I cry with him, and I am honored and humbled to introduce Judge Houston Brown. Thank you so much for coming to share with us, Your Honor. You have the floor.
Thank you very much, Lawrence. I appreciate that very lengthy and unworthy introduction, but at the same time, I truly appreciate our friendship and our dedication to each other. I want to say that I am really impressed with your leadership of Brother Nomberg, joined in by my good friend from down in the great state of Louisiana, and what you all are doing to present the issues related to the overall concept of peace is wonderful. And of course, lawyers have always been at the forefront of these sorts of issues. And I am not going to deal very much with peace today. I will say this, I'm going to just simply talk a little bit about how and what we have to bring to the table when we participate in the process of seeking peace. There are always two or more positions in opposition to one another. In every peace process, whether it be religious, whether it's political, whether it's social, whether it's family, and the whole process depends on the factual history brought to it by the people who are participating. So I thought I'd do something just to let you know a little bit about my background, because I have experienced quite a bit that would color and my approach to peace as it relates to civil rights, racism, and more importantly, the whole concept of white supremacy. One night in December of 1950, near Christmas time, I was approximately 8 years old, and I heard this god-awful loud sound. And basically, what I later discovered was that it was a bomb going off within a half a mile of our house where we were living at the time. The bomb went off at the home of Mary and Monroe Monk on the Center Street, wrong side of the red line, which separated the white community from the black community, where Arthur D. Shores had won a case permitting and allowing the Monk family to construct a brand new house on a lot that they had purchased. That bomb was so loud and so powerful that it damaged our kitchen by causing the cabinets, some of the cabinets, not all of the cabinets, some of the cabinets to fall off the wall onto the floor. And one of them happened to be a cabinet that contained most of my mother's dishes. So couple that with the bomb and the cabinet falling and the dishes crashing, I ended up under my bed for a couple of hours, scared to death. That was my introduction to violence. Prior to that time, my parents had done a very, very good job of insulating and protecting us from any kind of incident that might be ongoing at the time, wherever we were, that would indicate to us and show us what violence was all about. 2 years later, my father came and he asked me to come into his room, and he sat me down in a chair and said, I want to have a conversation with you. This conversation had to do with the increased activity in the area of the Mary Means monks' house, which, based on the activity, became known as Dynamite Hill in Smithfield in Birmingham, Alabama. And when he had finished, he had shown me how to work a walkie-talkie. He had shown me how to place safety on long guns. He had showed me where a small arsenal under lock and key was located, how to open it, and how to take the guns downstairs every night for years to men who would back a car into our garage and sit there all night long. My mother, of course, being the proper lady that she was, would not, after preparing a midnight snack for them, go downstairs in her night clothes. So I had to get up out of the bed every night and take the snack down to the men who would sit there all night long. And the purpose of that was to protect the community from the random shootings, bombings, and most important, the home of Arthur D. Shores, who lived right across the street. And that went on forever. So here's this little 12-year-old right in the midst of everything, bombs going off frequently everywhere. And it caused me to do a lot of thinking about why would someone dislike a person? Hadn't gotten to the word hate, but why would someone dislike a person so much that they would want to bomb their homes and destroy the home as well as the person or persons residing therein? And to this day, I do not understand. To this day, I do not understand how anybody can do to a people what has been done just in that small community of Smithfield. Now, we know it's been done all over this country. We know how long it's been done. And contrary to a lot of popular belief, it didn't start in 1619. That was the first ship that came under British rule. But it started even with the explorers out of Spain, Portugal, and way up north in the Dutch country. Those explorers had slaves from Europe that they brought with them, who stayed every time they set up a colony. The first slave revolt was in 1526 in and around South Carolina, documented by the state of South Carolina's encyclopedia, official state encyclopedia. And I'm sorry, excuse me. So I guess what I'm saying is that peace is dependent in large measure on so many factors that arise from people's experiences, personal experiences. There's no one here at my place to answer my phone, and I apologize for that. I'm gonna take it off the hook and hope that it doesn't. So please forgive me. So I guess what I want to say is that my experiences have taught me that that we have to listen and have empathy, which allows us to place ourselves somewhat in the shoes of the party against whom we are sitting at the table and trying to reach some accord, no matter how small or how little. And if we do not listen, if we do not hear, if we cannot place ourselves somewhat in their shoes, we cannot understand what they bring to the table experientially, and therefore it would short circuit the effort to arrive at a peaceful conclusion. Now, having said all of that, I'm really torn. I don't know how to cut the ringer off on this phone, so please forgive me. I'm sorry. I'm torn in terms of our efforts at peace in the Middle East, our efforts at peace in the Far East, our efforts at peace in the north of Asia, where Russia is doing a lot of stuff, our efforts at peace right here in our own neighborhood, our efforts at peace on the African continent, and our efforts at peace in South America. The world is in a mess, and we need more entities like Lawyers for Peace at work out here trying to contribute to find ways to make peace among all of the issues and things that are going on. I don't know how to do that. And I have really participated through the years in lots and lots of issues that required resolution. And many times resolution was not able to be had. Many times partial resolutions were reached. But we've got a heck of a job ahead of us as a world to find better ways to sit down and work out our problems so that we can have a peaceful existence on this earth. I can truthfully say personally that I have never seen a time in this country when we were at peace racially. I've seen only the unalterable negative effects of the concept of white supremacy and as it has affected African Americans. And we see every day, just simply by listening to the news, reading the newspaper, looking at the TV news, the effects of a history, a complete and total history of violence that has been perpetrated against Black people in this country since they arrived here. And it's not going to stop in 165 years until we can come together on mutual terms in a manner consistent with resolving the problems that exist. I am absolutely delighted to participate in this. I will be available to take questions and do anything that I can do to help. And once again, I just want to say that I am absolutely delighted in the formation, the creation, and the continuation of this sort of informal organization at this time, Lawyers for Peace, in the Birmingham legal community. Thank you very much.
Judge Brown, if I could ask you a question, and I know Kyra has a question as well. I asked you this when you were gracious enough to speak in 2017 when we did this. And I'm going to ask you again today. You have shared publicly some of the circumstances in which you grew up in, and they included store policies in Birmingham where Black people could not try on clothes because the stores wouldn't put them back on the rack for the white people. Black people, if they purchased clothes, would take them home, and if they didn't fit, they could not exchange them. Black people could not get mortgages, life insurance. You've shared with us about the bombings that you grew up as part of the fabric of your life. And yet when you became a circuit judge and I walked in for the first time, I don't know that I knew you prior to the time that you were a judge, not well if I did, but here I come in, a middle-aged Southern white male lawyer, and you treated me with dignity and respect and an equal playing field. You met me with peace. And I asked you in 2017, and I'm going to ask you again today, why didn't you hate me? What is your secret for looking across at someone so vastly different than you and meeting me with peace?
Larry, the best thing that I can say in response to your question is that I have two heroes in my life, my mother and my father, neither of which enjoys any more importance than the other. But they taught me a lot of things. Number one, that hatred will destroy you internally, and that we should not hate. We should not return ill will simply because we receive it, but find a way to deal with it. We could not use any language that in my household, growing up as a child and as an adult, that reflected negatively on anybody, their religion, their race, their gender, their place in life. Everybody was welcome at our table no matter what. And that's the way my parents taught me to live. Now, I, like most little boys and girls, went to church and learned about the love of Jesus Christ. And I'm a Christian. And I accept totally what Jesus means to us in terms of his love for us and his sacrifice to make certain that we could live and become all that we can become, which we are still becoming. But almost to a person, everybody that I knew in the community felt the same way. It is one of the reasons, Larry, that I still wonder why people hate me so much because of the color of my skin. I don't understand. We have taken care of young white babies. We've taken care of old white people. We've taken care of everybody. We have cooked and fed and nursed and everything through the years. I have yet to hear of an account like we just heard in Russia. The person who may have been poisoned because he differs in his approach to politics in that large country. I don't recall anything like that. We could have slipped a Mickey over and over into everything, but we didn't do that. We waited until it was lawful to be free. And then we were not free. We had to suffer through everything that you know about, Jim Crow, all of the bad negative laws that were passed to keep us down, even unto the present. And nothing is more telling than the Supreme Court's ruling destroying a portion of the Voting Rights Act that John Lewis got his skull cracked trying to get passed in his attempted trek over the bridge in Selma, as evidenced by Shelby County versus the Attorney General of the United States of America, where that case was the relief sought by Shelby County was granted. And what did we do, particularly in the South, Southwest? We passed laws within days that made it even more difficult to vote. And I don't understand what generates the kind of feeling in people who have way more control, power, authority over little people like me.
I would submit it is unfounded cowardice and fear.
Yeah, I don't think I could add anything else to that.
Hi, Karen.
Thank you, Judge Brown. Good to see
How
you.
you doing?
I'm doing great. It's good.
Wonderful to see you. Thank you.
So thank you so much, Judge Brown. We have always been enlightened by your wisdom, and we hope to see more of you soon.
Thank you.
Judge, thank you.
Thank you.
Kara, what do we have now?
Oh, I am so excited. We have Joyce Vance coming up next. And Joyce Vance was the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama during the Obama administration. Since the administration change, she joined the faculty at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa. And she also frequently serves as a commentator on a national cable outlet. And so we are so excited to have her here with us to share some of her thoughts. And actually, we're going to take this segment as sort of a conversation. Joyce and I, long time ago, when I was a public defender and she was the U.S. Attorney, Joyce convened lots of roundtables where folks on both sides of the aisle of prosecution and defense would talk about how we would solve problems. And so this is going to be sort of I don't want to call it a fireside chat, but just a conversation between two people who work together. And so I'm so glad to have Joyce join us together. And I think Lawrence is going to take a little way out. And Joyce, good to see you this morning. Oh, Joyce, I don't think we have your sound. Let's get you unmuted.
Sorry about that. Thanks for having me. It's great to see you.
Yeah, so Joyce, we have been talking all this morning. I know you've had a chance to listen to a little bit of it, but we've been talking about peace and how lawyers and advocates can work for peace, but we are in an unsettled time. And we've gotten to a point where some things need to be resolved. And I know you, we know you as a prosecutor and people think of that, but you also were very heavily involved in the civil rights work of the Northern District of Alabama. You are the person who is the standard bearer for the rule of law in our area. And can you tell me what it's like right now for you as you watch what's going on in the world?
I always thought that prosecutors were civil rights lawyers, that your job as a prosecutor every day, you're sort of the line between police power, which, as we all know, there's a lot of power that rests with the police, and protecting the constitutional rights of citizens. So I viewed the civil rights work that we did in our office on the civil side as simply being an outgrowth of the work that we did on the criminal side of the house. You can't be a prosecutor unless you're willing to observe and strictly enforce constitutional limits. That was one of the core beliefs I had that guided my assignment of priorities in our offices. So as you point out, and we all know, we've been through a tough 3.5 years in this country. Our democratic institutions have been stretched often to the breaking point by a president who, and it gives me absolutely no pleasure to say this, but I think increasingly we have to call it what it is and just stare it in the face. We have a president who does not believe in the rule of law, who is fundamentally opposed to applying the rule of law to himself. And this notion that we have someone so singularly opposed to our way of life running the country has put us in a really difficult place. I had a conversation with Sherilyn Ifill, who many of you may know, earlier this week. Sherilyn is the president and CEO of the Legal Defense Fund, which is the litigating arm of the NAACP. And she pointed out that in so many ways, as lawyers, we have failed in our responsibilities to our community in the last 3.5 years. We've all been like, you know, we know that old story about frogs getting boiled, right? You put the frogs in the pot and you slowly bring up the water so they never notice it. And by the time they actually realize that they're being boiled, it's too late to do anything about it. In many ways, that's what's happened here, starting with the Muslim ban in the early days of the Trump administration, going on through the inhumane family separation policy. And y'all know the full scope of what I'm talking about. I mean, there are 20 or 30 other examples that we could go through. And so Sherilyn asked me, why as lawyers, why did our community never step up and call it out? Why didn't we have bar associations all across the country saying we can't violate fundamental human rights? I'm not talking about policy decisions here. Look, policy is policy, and that's why we have elections. Democrats and Republicans, we don't agree about those things, and we can debate those issues respectfully and agree that the people who win elections get to make those decisions. I'm talking about violation of the law, which has clearly happened by this administration on so many occasions. As lawyers, I mean, I would say the frogs are almost boiled. It's getting close to too late, but we have this one last opportunity to live up to the best aspirations of our profession and to try to protect this election, which is clearly in danger. I'm sure many of you saw overnight, the president indicated that he would station military people in polling places to protect them. That is, of course, a clear violation of federal law. Can't happen. You can't even put FBI agents or US Marshals in polling places. But this president, the law is no barrier to him in the exercise of his powers. And he's now desperate to win this election for a lot of reasons that we're all fully aware of. If you can take a public health crisis and politicize it like we've done with COVID, then you don't have to really think very hard about how much danger our election is. It's finally time for lawyers to fulfill their obligations to their communities, not in terms of who you vote for. And one of the things that I was committed to as US attorney, you know, working in Alabama, when you do work to make elections accessible, you're probably making sure that a lot more Republicans than Democrats are going to be able to vote. That wasn't, you know, that didn't bother me. My goal wasn't to worry about how people cast their ballots. I just fundamentally believe that everyone should be able to exercise their right to vote. So there's no reason Republicans and Democrats can't come together right now in order to ensure that exercise of the vote. The problem that we have, and it was apparent this morning in the Senate hearing with Postmaster Louis DeJoy, is that the Republicans are very opposed to working with Democrats to guarantee access during the pandemic.
Well, you and I were able to work together, and we were, I mean, my job was to keep people out of prison. And oftentimes, you know, the idea for a public defender is to say, prosecutor's bad, defense attorney's good. We're gonna be very opposed to those things. And how is it that we as lawyers who do advocate for different policy positions can maintain peace by continuing the dialogue and by taking action? I mean, what things do you think could be different about how lawyers interact with conditions that appear to challenge the rule of law?
I think we have to keep the professional and the personal separate, right? Professionally, when we're in the courtroom on a specific case, Of course, we're oppositional. This is the sort of a system that we have. We're supposed to be that way. So I fully expect you to call me a dog of a prosecutor, not in quite those words, when we're in the courtroom, and to point out every failure or close to failure or imagined failure I may have made in investigating my case, because your obligation as a defense lawyer is to vigorously represent your client. Sometimes, the scrutiny might be a little bit hot, but I don't mind it. My job as a prosecutor was to get everything right. And so I expect that we're going to go head to head inside of the courtroom. That's the professional. On the personal side of things, though, I can't tell you how many times I walked out of a courtroom and went out to get a beer or a glass of wine with the lawyers on the opposing sides. I mean, we have those warm collegial relationships. I worry that we're losing that a little bit in the bar, but I think that that's been a worry of every generation in the bar, because I think I've been hearing people say that since I was a young lawyer. We should be intentional. We should work to maintain good personal relationships, even though we're professional adversaries. And you know what that means right now, I think, is that we should be trying to talk to folks on the other side of the aisle, whether that's a political aisle or whether that's a progressive conservative aisle, which doesn't necessarily have to be political, but can be more about policy choices. And so the real question is, and look, I'm always happy to work with people on the other side. I do a lot of that. I spend a lot of time doing criminal justice reform work. That work is all being done on a bipartisan basis. One of the groups that I'm involved in right now, the Council on Criminal Justice, where I'm in their first class of fellows, it's helmed by, on one side, Sally Yates, the former acting attorney general for the United States, the holdover from the Obama administration, and on the other side by the head of the Koch Foundation, a very conservative advocacy group. So that work is bipartisan, and it's still happening. I fear that that won't happen on voting, but at least in Alabama, in our state, I don't see any reason that lawyers can't work together, no matter who they are and who they intend to vote for, to insist that the Secretary of State make voting safe during a pandemic. We know that absentee voting works really well for us in this state. We have a great track record, because while I was U.S. attorney, we forced the state of Alabama to come into compliance with the UOCAVA requirements that provide access to ballots for our overseas military members and their families. And Secretary Merrill put a great deal of work into that process once the lawsuit resolved it. Our military members vote by mail. It's worked extremely well. There hasn't been even a whiff of fraud. We've traditionally had an absentee balloting process in this state, which, spoiler alert, is used primarily by elderly Republicans. That's the primary demographic that has used the absentee ballots. No reason we can't expand that during a pandemic. Something Republicans and Democrats can agree on, that all lawyers, here's a circle of ground we can all stand on. No one should have to put their health at risk in order to vote. So that seems to me a primary area that we can work on, to ask the Secretary of State to expand access to absentee balloting, to make sure that ballots get to people. Our process here is really confusing. My daughter went through it as a foreign exchange student during the primaries, and we had to talk repeatedly about, what envelope do I put my ballot in? Who can I get to notarize my ballot? I mean, just every step of it is designed to be confusing. So something we can do as lawyers is help make that easier for folks and make the directions a little bit clearer.
Well, we can't really talk about voting without talking about the post office. And it's clearly, an issue that is going to come up. It's a medical issue, but it's also really a voting issue as well. Can you talk to why this is a nonpartisan issue? Can you talk about why the post office matters and the constitutional underpinnings of the post office, and why we as lawyers should not be concerned about who's running the post office as opposed to what the post office does for us?
Of course, the post office is an organization that's created by the Constitution. And it's really interesting. I actually went back and read Article 1 of the Constitution when this whole issue around the post office surfaced. And I thought it was really interesting that the direction to Congress in the Constitution to create the post office comes in the same section of the Constitution where Congress is directed to create the military, to create money, to create the lower federal courts. So many of these foundational institutions of our democracy are created in the same breath as the post office. That gives you a sense of its importance. Also, another piece of factual information that many of you are probably aware of, there was legislation crammed down on the post office that requires it to fully fund its retirement systems, its pension plans. That is not the way any other business or government organization has to work. And that unnecessary legislation is due in large part for these constant stories that surface talking about what a financial predicament the post office is in. It's artificial, and frankly, it could and should be done away with corrective legislation that would let the post office run like any other organization. I don't have to tell any of y'all how essential the post office is right now. Case in point, so many people, and especially our veterans, aren't receiving necessary medications that they're used to getting through the post office. You know, in my house, where we've been pretty strictly quarantined because we've got a kid who's medically fragile, I look forward to the mail. I confess, it's become one of the highlights of my day. And whether it's schooling materials our youngest kid needs for school, or work-related materials for me, that's really our lifeline. But for people who depend on the post office for life-saving measures, for medication, and even for some of their food supplies, this slowdown is really unacceptable. This morning, the postmaster testified in front of a Senate Oversight Committee and conceded that he would not make changes in the post office until after the election, and that he would prioritize ballots in the Postal Service. A lot of the damage is already done. They've pulled high-speed sorting equipment out of a lot of post offices. They've cut back on overtime, in many cases declining it entirely. So the post office, like the rest of us, is struggling with COVID. Instead of making it easier to deliver the mail, this postmaster has made it more difficult. And here again, as with the pandemic, the issue has been politicized. It doesn't have to be, and it shouldn't be. What should be happening here is efforts to strengthen the post office. And instead, Republicans and Democrats in the Senate are at loggerheads. Here too, this seems like an issue that locally all lawyers could work on together, just to support the local postal service. We know these folks work hard for us day in and day out. Our postmaster here in Birmingham is homegrown. He's someone who's grown up in the postal service. He's served this community well, whether it's been delivering mail or election-related work. And I guess the last thing I'll say about this, Alan King, our recently retired probate judge, shared with me several weeks ago that they had made a commitment. They had received a commitment from the post office that rather than waiting for the post office to deliver ballots on election day to be counted, that Judge King could actually go over and pick the ballots up so that they could be counted more easily and accessibly. Because of course, in Alabama, we have this rule that says it's not enough if your absentee ballot is postmarked by election day. It has to be received by the county registrar on election day. So Judge King would go over and get the ballots so that they could be counted, so that there wasn't a delay in reporting the ballot totals. That's the sort of thing that lawyers in our community need to continue to push for, that collegiality that's designed to make our election systems function securely, safely, and accurately.
All right. Well, you have said a mouthful, Joyce. And what I hear from you is sometimes there's a little bit of a battle before the peace, and that we've got to do some fighting as lawyers to protect the rule of law in order to make sure that we can have peace. Because if we don't protect the rule of law, there will be no peace.
Well, look, I love the theme for this get together. I think that it's so important to think about how lawyers can and should work together. But we are at a point in this country where we need to squarely face the fact that not all people feel that way. My hope is that because of our traditional strong relationships in Jefferson County, that we can find a way to set an example. After all, Birmingham, in many ways, has often provided an example, either for good or for evil, that has resonated with the whole country. I would love to see us provide an example for good here.
Thank you, Joyce. I'm so glad to have talked to you, and we have to get together there's so much more to talk about on this. And so I can't.
I hope we can do that soon.
I know. When we all leave our houses, you're on my top of my list.
Same.
Thank
Joyce,
you.
Thank
thank
you. Y'all
you.
have a good day.
Thank you so much for coming. One quick question, if I could, of kind of a fun note. How are the chickens?
You know, the chickens are doing good. Bob's and my youngest child just sort of off the hand asked if he could have chickens at the very start of the pandemic. So we bought two 2-week-old chickens and brought home eggs, and I hatched 4 chickens. So we now have 6 literally running around like chickens with their head cut off chickens. They're crazy and they're wonderful, and it has in many ways saved us during the pandemic.
Very good. Thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Thanks. Y'all have a wonderful day.
Thank
Bye,
you.
Joyce. Well,
All right.
that was a mouthful, wasn't it?
That was an earful. That's a lot of points to ponder there. So grateful that we were able to have Joyce so graciously share her time with us.
Well,
Our next speaker is, we're just so absolutely honored and humbled to have our next speaker have agreed to come in and speak with us. And I think they're letting him come into the room now as we speak. The late Congressman John Lewis. Good morning.
Good morning. Good morning.
The late Congressman John Lewis said of Doug Jones that he has the capacity to bring us together and not to continue to divide people. Senator Jones himself has aptly noted, quote, "So many of the divisions in our country started in the South, and the South needs to be the leader in the healing. And we need to be sure every one of us is treated with dignity and respect." Doug Jones was born into a segregated Fairfield, Alabama, and saw his high school integrate. His high school friend, Darnell Gardner, later president of the Fairfield City Council, recalled, quote, "Doug was always there, acting as a mediator," end quote. As a U.S. attorney for the Northern District of Birmingham, Doug Jones prosecuted and convicted 2 members of the Ku Klux Klan, finally securing justice in our community here in Birmingham for the most horrific crime in the history of our city: the bombing of the 16th Street Baptist Church that killed 4 innocent little girls. As a United States Senator, he has worked for peace through reaching across the aisle, co-sponsoring legislation on agriculture, broadband access, corporate disclosure, defense, tax, and trade with Republican senators as diverse as Senator Marco Rubio, Senator Joni Ernst, Senator Tom Cotton, and Senator Pat Toomey, all Republican members of the Senate. We are absolutely grateful to have him come share with us today, and it is a high honor of my professional life to introduce to you, ladies and gentlemen, United States Senator Doug Jones. Thank you, Senator. You have the floor.
Thank you so much. It is my honor to be here with you today. I hope, I hope you've had a good conference this morning, even though it is virtual. But I just really appreciate this opportunity to share a few words. And as I was thinking about what it was what words I could bring, I kept referring back to a couple of other talks that I've given, and one that came to mind, and one that I just will really draw on and almost repeat, is the one I gave back in June on the Senate floor. You know, for the 2nd year in a row, we read Dr. King's letter from a Birmingham jail. Last year was the first time it had ever been read in its entirety. I had 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats read that letter and said then how contemporary it was. This year we did it again. 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats. Now, we have wanted to coincide it with the letter being written in April with the Birmingham marches. But of course, we were home. The pandemic had shut everything down and we were working virtually. But I think, there's a higher spirit sometimes that makes things move in the right way. And so it was not until June, after the death of George Floyd, that we were able to get that on the floor. And I think it became more powerful. So I would like to just spend a few minutes with you talking about that. If you haven't read that letter lately, you should. It is just a remarkable piece of work. And when we think about Dr. King, we usually see him on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, eloquently, passionately describing his dream for America, or behind a pulpit in Memphis, urging the audience to press forward in their quest for civil and equal rights because he had been to the mountaintop. It's frankly quite astounding to read his thoughts in that letter that were read on the floor of the Senate, and picture him in a small, dirty jail cell, writing in longhand on napkins and scraps of paper to a group of ministers that were not hateful as much as they were just questioning the need for action at that particular moment. There's some who would say that sharing thoughts on our situation today, I need to move beyond 1963, that we all need to move beyond 1963, a call to action that was so long ago. And it's true, there are certainly contemporary voices and writings that explain this moment, our time. But I believe we're at a similar moment today than we were in 1963, and that Dr. King's words are as contemporary as they are powerful. In 1963, Alabama had become the focal point of racism, division, and hatred in our nation. Bombings and fires in the Black neighborhoods were common. Suspects never apprehended. A governor promising segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever. Bull Connor shocking the nation when he unleashed fire hoses and dogs on innocent children engaged in peaceful protest. And later, the church bombing that killed 4 young girls simply because of the color of their skin. So the question of the day, on the day he was arrested in 1963, was why now? Why risk jail and perhaps death to protest conditions in a city that had just elected a new city government and had promised change? It was a question Dr. King and all Black Americans had heard for far too long, and it was time to answer. I believe the wisdom of the letter is perhaps the best to frame the view of how we move forward today during this moment in time, the movement of this generation. In passage after passage, Dr. King warns us how easily people can fall back to accepting the status quo, how easily people can hear the words wait when in fact the word means never. From a jail cell in Birmingham in 1963, Dr. King told us that action in that moment was critical so that the issues of racism and inequality would no longer be ignored. And here we are, 57 years later, and his words are still just as timely. The action in this moment, our moment, is likewise critical so that the issues of systemic racism and inequality can finally be erased. While so many seem to be heeding Dr. King's call for action, my greatest fear at this moment, when so many people have felt either powerless or unaffected, are willing to march and speak out, ready to change the fairness of our laws in our society, my greatest concern is that those good people of goodwill will get distracted. It's easy to be overwhelmed by the magnitude of the problem. It's understandable to not know where to begin, but it is not enough to simply agree to have a conversation. Remember, Dr. King confesses to the ministers to whom he's responding that he has been gravely disappointed with what he terms in 1963 as the white moderate. If a conversation is all that comes from the moment we're in, then our society will have to have lost the greatest chance of our lifetime to remedy wrongs that have been compounded for centuries. It's time for both our institutions and our society to meaningfully reverse the degenerating sense of nobodiness, as Dr. King described. In this moment, we've got a critical mass of society that can understand the legitimate and unavoidable impatience of which Dr. King wrote. You know, the last few months have made the truths of being Black in America clear to all. We've watched somewhat helplessly as a pandemic killed Black people at a rate almost 2.5 times that of other Americans. Not from a mutation of the virus, but from an underfunded health system that too often deprive Black Americans of care for diabetes, heart disease, and other health conditions described today as pre-existing conditions. We watched an economic toll as Black-owned businesses failed at twice the rate of others, and unemployment for Black Americans rose faster and still stays higher. Of course, through the pandemic, we've also seen workers in our African-American communities delivering packages, stocking grocery stores, being on the front lines in hospitals and as first responders. But the economic reality of being Black in America remains a sin of our nation. There's certainly a lot of folks, Black Americans, who pushed through the system, found the American dream, and we celebrate them, but we must face the fact that discrimination and institutional racism push too hard against the health, education, job opportunities, and financial security of those that our government once counted as only 3/5 citizens. And then, well, in the course of this pandemic, as we were seeing the truths of the system in society that had been easy to pretend didn't really exist, on our screens came a video of a Black man being killed with the knee of a police officer on the back of his neck. The image of George Floyd on the ground, as low as one could physically get, with the knee of a police officer, an agent of the state, with his knee on his neck, keeping him on the ground, was more than just an image of the legalities of a violation of George Floyd's civil rights under color of law. It was an image of a society and culture that keeps a knee on the necks of Black Americans through systemic racism and discrimination. The cries of "I can't breathe" were not just cries of an innocent man pleading for his life, but the cries of so many of our fellow citizens who are choked by a healthcare system that denies them access to quality, affordable healthcare, who can't breathe the fresh air of affordable housing, education, and economic opportunities, or who simply have to hold their own breath when they or their sons or daughters venture away from their homes, fearing a police officer encounter that will take their life. Perhaps even more than the dogs and fire hoses and dogs in Birmingham, or the state trooper beatings on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, the video of George Floyd's last moments on earth was a confluence of events that gave our nation an image of itself that it could no longer bear. I truly and fully believe that the soul of America came to the streets of America looking for a way for all people to live in a more just society. That we are at a time when what I have called a crisis trifecta of health, economic, and inequality has resulted in a careful examination and introspection of beliefs and priorities about race and poverty that we have come to understand more than at any time in the history of our country, that whatever affects one directly affects us all indirectly. Standing on the floor of the U.S. Senate, though, I know that the moment required more than an introspection on our part. We in the Senate and the government as a whole have the power to affect change. To not do so with speed would be forever unpardonable. As a person, I must keep an open heart, an open mind to listen and with concern and empathy. But as a senator, I'm ready to act, freely admitting that I have not got the ideal solutions, but not letting the theoretical perfect be the enemy of the tangible change we've got to see. Not asking our citizens to wait even longer than they already have. As a body, the Senate has acted before, and we should be acting again. To that end, we're seeing proposals for law enforcement reform from the administration, from congressional leaders on both sides of the aisle. And I'm hopeful, really even optimistic still, as we're getting farther and farther down in this Congress, that we can find common ground, to find the necessary common ground to achieve meaningful reform. But we really are going to have to do more than just with law enforcement. As Dr. King reminds us, sometimes a law is just on its face and unjust in its application. I'd add to that, a law which seemed to hold promise can be eroded to the point where it becomes unjust. To that end, we should review the Voting Rights Act, now named after my friend John Lewis, to make sure that easy access to the ballot box is a reality, especially in the midst of a healthcare crisis. We should examine existing laws and practices in education to make sure everyone has equal access to quality education. We got to be examining existing laws that everyone has equal economic opportunities, including protections from employment discriminations. To that extent, we saw this summer a historic Supreme Court decision protecting the LGBTQ community from employment discrimination. I called on Senator McDonald at the next day to immediately bring the Equality Act to the floor of the Senate and affirm the United States Senate's commitment to ending discrimination in the workplace in any form against any individual. Of course, we have yet to see that come to the floor, and I doubt we will see it unless we have some serious change in the next election. We need to be examining, again, existing laws that continue to deny quality, affordable health care to poor and low-income households, including giving states like Alabama the incentives to expand Medicaid. We need to examine the Fair Housing Act, signed only a week after Dr. King was assassinated, in order to ensure that the act fulfills the promise upon which it was enacted. We spend billions of dollars each year to perpetuate housing that just keeps people without means, especially Black families, trapped in places where it's difficult to access education, healthy food, and economic opportunities. Unfortunately, all signs are pointing to a worsening housing crisis because of this pandemic. As a people, as a Congress, we cannot let this moment pass. But by saying that, I mean more than just passing reforms. Surely reforms are needed, but the greater need is to not just to reform, but to transform, to make a dramatic change in the nature and character of our institutions and our culture toward a more just government and society. To that end, as we focus on heeding Dr. King's call to action written in 1963, we should also heed his admonition written just 3 years after the passage of the Civil Rights Act and 2 years after the passage of the Voting Rights Act. In his 1967 book, his final book, Where We Go From Here, Chaos or Community, Dr. King wrote that America, quote, has been sincere and even ardent in welcoming some change, but too quickly apathy and disinterest rise to the surface when the next logical steps are to be taken. Laws are passed in a crisis mood after Birmingham or Selma, but no substantial fervor survives the formal signing of legislation. The recording of the law itself is treated as the reality of reform. The point is simply, but significantly, to those of you who have suffered long for equality and for opportunity, keep this moment alive. Keep it alive beyond the crisis mood we find ourselves in by continuing to engage those who have more recently seen your plight through new eyes. Demand that we not meet this moment with more division, intolerance, and anger at one another that pulls us further apart and deeper into the chaos we have failed to heal. That cannot be America's future. Demand that it is not be, as Dr. King's letter warned, simply a moment for another conversation that makes it sound like something is changing but never does. The path from the first slave ship to land on these shores to that lone barren jail cell in Birmingham, where Dr. King wrote his letter we still read today, to the deaths of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and Rayshard Brooks, is a long one. Too long. It's a path of a multi-generational failure for America to live up to its ideals, where the Civil War is actually over and we are truly one nation with liberty and justice for all. I will tell you that as a son of the South, the son of the Deep South, to not lose this moment. We in the South, as has been said, have been at the center of these divisions for far too long, and we can be at the center of healing and leading the nation to a more just society. Since our country's inception, we have said the words, all are created equal. We have pledged that we are a nation of justice for all, not some, all. But we know we have never lived up to that ideal. In response to many of the protests that are taking place across this country over the last 3 months, where voices and T-shirts and face masks proclaim Black Lives Matter, some insist on responding by saying, well, of course, all lives matter. And they do. We all know that. But we will not be a country where all are truly equal and where justice is for all until we all can say the words Black Lives Matter and mean it. We have to mean it now. All of us must reject the voices of hatred and intolerance and division. All of us must embrace taking action to root out injustice and to seek justice and opportunity for all. The road to racial justice in America has taken far too long, but it is a path we must walk together if we're to reach the mountaintop. To my colleagues, I said, join me and others. To the people of Alabama and our nation, to you in this audience, I say, let's join together. It's time, America. It's time. Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate the opportunity.
Senator, if I could ask you one quick question here.
Sure.
We had the honor of having one of your good friends speak earlier today, former Canterbury senior pastor, the Reverend Dr. Bill Morgan.
Yeah.
You'll be glad to know, described you as a regular church guy, a regular attender, and a good giver.
Well, I'm Doug Jones, and I approve this message. Okay.
I wanted to ask you, we've had such a great pleasure today hearing from a Catholic priest, a rabbi, 2 Protestant ministers, a nun who oversees 13,000 Benedictine sisters worldwide. We've heard a number of different faith perspectives, and I know among the viewers today, we have some who have no particular journey of faith or journeys of faith in a variety of different denominations. I'd like you, if you would, please, sir, you've spoken very strongly today about equality among all people. Could you share with us how your particular journey of faith has informed you on that pursuit and on those beliefs?
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, I think you could follow mine along with what Joe Biden may have said for those who watched my friend Joe last night. If you truly are a person of faith, regardless of that faith, you have to believe in the dignity and respect of all people, even those you disagree with, those of different faiths. You know, that's what this country was all about, founded on. It's what we were all about. And I think that when you do that, if you really look and put faith in the forefront and not political power or political, dog whistle politics to some extent, then that what you heard from me a few moments ago, again, a white son of the South, I think you see that in there. It comes forward because I believe that's what I was taught in Sunday school and vacation Bible school growing up. It's what I was taught, and it's what I listen to every time I am in church at Canterbury Methodist Church. I don't see how anybody could see things less, quite frankly, and still profess to be a person of faith. And again, that's regardless of the faith. And I haven't studied all the great religions throughout history or in the world today, but I know that there needs to be, and there should be, among the thread that is common through all, is a belief in the dignity and respect of humanity and human beings, and that they all have worth. And that's what has guided me, I think, simply from day one.
Thank you so much for that. And thank you for all of the work that you've done on behalf of the people of Alabama. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for constantly standing as a beacon of hope and peace and justice for all of us. And we're so grateful that you took time out of, I know you're on the campaign trail right now. Thank you so much for taking moments out of that to share with us today the benefit of your wisdom and your experience and your learning and even your faith. So we're all very grateful.
Thank you very much. Let me just leave with one quote from somebody, because I think it's appropriate to where we are, and it's appropriate for this group who I know fully understands the words. You've heard from such great speakers today. But let me just leave with this final quote. It's from Robert F. Kennedy, one of my heroes, because we're in difficult times right now. It's very, very, we're all trying to adjust. We're seeing the various crises, and we're trying to do all that we can. But in those crises, there are opportunities. And it was Robert F. Kennedy who said, we all might wish at times we live in a more tranquil world, but we don't. And if our times are difficult and perplexing, so too are they challenging and filled with opportunity. Instead of bemoaning the crisis, let's look at this as a unique opportunity to build a stronger, better America, to build a stronger, better Alabama and a much more just society. So thank you so much for letting me join you today. I've enjoyed it. I appreciate it very much. Thank you for all the work you guys are doing.
Thank you, Senator.
Wow.
Kyle? Yeah, wow. You took my word. What are your thoughts on that? I want to hear from you if you'd share with us. I'm very interested in your reaction to that.
Well, I want to say, I've been watching this, and I think we talked a little bit a while ago, like, of how unsettled I was, as we watched the George Floyd protests go through, and the senseless murder, and watched as people have died around us, that there was this sense of unease. And what I'm struck by right now is the change in the conversation, the discussion that we're now having around racial injustice and racial equality, and putting the onus. I always say, I'm a Black person. I actually have a degree in being Black. I have a degree in African American studies. So I'm very trained to see the issues around race. But to hear my legal community, and to hear people who are not people of color to begin to grapple with these concepts in public and with candor, it is so refreshing to me as a person who, this is the only body I've ever lived in. And it's the only body I'm ever going to live in. And it's colored by a race lens. And to start to hear folks who don't have to engage in the conversation of race unless they have to do it willingly, to do it openly, and to begin to grapple with it, to fix it so that we're all better, it gives me hope. It gives me a great deal of hope. And I just hope that we can continue, even though, we're talking about these things because it's painful now, because we see it, because it's been visual. But this is a conversation that has to continue. It cannot end today. Because the work did not begin yesterday. It began in August of 1619, when the first of us came to this country, and it will continue until we grapple with this and we all deal with it openly and honestly. So I'm so glad that we've all been here today. I've learned so much from every one of these speakers. I'm glad to have met you in visual person. We see each other on Twitter all the time. And I'm so glad for you guys to have been honest and shared how you felt as you've navigated this world recently. So what were your thoughts?
What came to mind was the phrase "growing pains." For those that follow the Christian faith as I do, we are taught to love our neighbor, and we'll never perfectly do that, but we are to aspire to that. Our birth document as a nation says that all men are created equal, and we are struggling to meet that ideal as well. It is painful to grow toward loving neighbor. It is painful to grow toward equality for many people, but I am so grateful that we have had this opportunity to talk about these things, to recognize that, yes, there is pain with growth, but growth is necessary to aspire to the ideals of virtually every faith, to grow to the ideals of America. And having this conversation today has reminded me to look inside myself, to listen more with my heart, to break bread with people that are different than me, to listen, and to be a better person. And I share your sentiment at what a phenomenal educational opportunity and learning opportunity we've had today. What incredible speakers that we've had sacrifice their time in their efforts to make us better people. I'm grateful for it. If anybody wants to watch it again, I'd like to again thank David and Bernard Nomberg for all of their incredible work behind the scenes and making the tech part of this go. This whole broadcast will be available on the Nomberg Law Firm's YouTube channel. If you'd ever like to revisit it, I'll be revisiting it tonight. Kyra, on a personal note, so great to work with you. You and I have been Twitter fans of each other for a long time. liking each other's tweets and that sort of stuff. Let's go break bread soon.
I hope we can get out of our houses and into each other's presence so quickly. So,
Let's do that.
all
Thank
right.
you so much, everybody, for joining. Goodbye from here. Kyra?
All right. Bye, everyone.